The 13th Doctor and Avatar Korra. One and the same? In 2005, a mere month apart, Doctor Who and Avatar: The Last Airbender took to our screens and took many of our hearts. The timing of these two airing is coincidental, I'll admit, but the similarities that took place once women were cast to play the title character cannot be overlooked. From the fandom network's response to the storylines and constant nostalgic comparisons, and much more, it is a miracle either show survived. But it's not really a miracle, is it? Because today, I'll be looking at the legacy of the 13th Doctor's era and Legend of Korra, and why their stories will remain in the fandom's hearts forever, whether it be reluctantly, gratefully, or what have you. There are always two sides to every debate, every story, and perhaps the 13th Doctor and Korra are different sides of the same coin. After all, independent women, with a history of past lives that suddenly get overwritten, with a chance of seeing the world, making new friends, and resolving conflict every episode, what could possibly go wrong? You see where this is going, right? Yeah, I really wish I meant that last question rhetorically, but before we get into in-show similarities, it's important to mention how the casting of these women into the roles were received. From the get-go, Nickelodeon was hesitant to allow Legend of Korra to exist, even after the immense failure of the live-action Avatar movie, and the likely welcome breath of fresh air Legend of Korra could be after that. But instead of embracing new opportunities, Korra's production was suspended just because its protagonist was a girl. Contrary-wise, when the BBC announced Jodie Whittaker to take over the usually male role of the Doctor, they celebrated her. Whether that was due to the BBC annual report showing the sizable pay gap and fame between white male talent and minority talent is unknown. But I mean, Chibnall only accepted the job if he could have a female doctor, so take that into account, please. But what's not unknown is how oppositely the networks and fandoms reacted to casting. While Nickelodeon fretted and the BBC celebrated, After Last Airbender fans celebrated Korra, while Doctor Who fans fretted over the 13th Doctor. Or should I say, Doctor Who fans received the news positively, while the larger voices in the fandom and political arena railed against it. The reason I point out the reversal of roles between broadcast and fandoms is because they are hugely intertwined, nearly canceling both shows in the Calamity and almost leaving us only one season of Legend of Korra or on a cliffhanger after Revolution of the Daleks, practically guaranteeing that both of these shows would fall short of their predecessors. Speaking of their predecessors, comparing these two to what came before them very nearly handicapped them, because both shows are trying to do new things to surprise old fans and are often criticized for taking a quote-unquote woke approach. But because of that approach, and sticking to it, Korra gained 4.5 million viewers and rated #1 kids show and #1 animated show of the week with its first episode, and Jodie Whittaker's first episode revitalized Doctor Who with a record-breaking 10.5 million viewers live in the UK. All of this is to say, there are risks and rewards for casting women in the main role of franchises, but not in the way one would think. And how I wish we didn't have to think about the consequences, the responses, or what any of this means for society as a whole. But it's something to reflect on, and it would be an oversight not to discuss all the elements at play and the troubles/accolades both shows received doing something as small and yet as important as changing the gender of the main character. Alright, now that we've addressed that, we can discuss the fun, nerdy intro comparisons that led me to create this video. Yay! To break it down, I've divided the similarities into these discussions: overarching theme, character growth and types, villain symbolism, and fandom response. I will also have a few random things to tack on at the end, no doubt, so bear with me, because I'm about to compare an animation between to the longest running sci-fi in history, and no one can stop me. Alright, firstly, let's break down the broad strokes of what themes fueled both shows and both female protagonists. I tend to see the 13th Doctor and Korra's arcs represented by their journey with mental health. Both go through significant trauma, they both isolate themselves from help, they both have an identity crisis, and they both get to a place of acceptance that they do deserve to live and love. It may not be in that nice of a chronological order, but neither is mental health. So, because both the 13th Doctor and Avatar Korra have past lives that can build the foundation of who they are, what they are, and how they shape the world, they are equally made vulnerable when that very same foundation is brought into question after their first lives are revealed. This happens in Book 2 with Korra discovering Avatar 1 teamed with Rava to fix his spiritual mistakes, and in the Season 12 finale with the 13th Doctor discovering she was a timeless child and her mom abused her to form Gallifreyan society as we the audience know it. Speaking of audiences, due to the execution and different canon, the fandom loved Avatar 1, yet hated the timeless child. But that's not the point here. The point is, during these huge conflicts in show, the characters suddenly had to deal with this theme of an identity crisis in order to overcome the main plot conflicts. Here is where Korra and 13 are eerily similar because the shock of the news trickles slowly into their lives, and they largely put it aside to deal with the main plot conflict instead. This lends itself to the theme of mental health, of denial stages, as well as common trauma responses. During their identity crises, the 13th Doctor questions who she is if her
It's
life's a
all
lie,
lies.
and Korra questions if it's even her place to stop the Water Tribe's civil war. Later on, after talk with Toph, Korra reveals in the episode Remembrances that she doubts the Avatar should even be so important or is actually bringing balance to the world. The 13th Doctor also questions her importance in the Timeless Children, so much so that she forgets how her family is relying on her to save them and that they know who she is now and how that identity is all that really matters. But tragedy strikes for both Korra and 13 as Korra loses her connection and therefore all her memories of her past lives, and 13 is still left wondering why her mom left these memories for her, if only to keep all of her other lives hidden and forgotten. Both characters then go into isolation, with Korra healing from the toll of Zaheer's battle away from all her friends, and 13 reeling from the reveal in a space jail due to the Jejun. What is very interesting about this response to trauma is how their friends also bear the consequences of Korra running away and pretending not to be the Avatar anymore, and how the fam reacts to 13 mistakenly abandoning them to the point where they thought that she was dead or desperately needed saving. This is where the trauma changes shape, during isolation and the end of isolation, because Korra's trauma manifests into the fear of being the Avatar and it occurring physically again, and 13's trauma bubbles up in self deprecation, avoidance, and anger. Externally, though, it's almost like Korra and 13 switch personalities. For Korra's trauma makes her more cool headed, fearing fights and fancying empathetic chat instead, whereas 13's trauma makes her more hot headed, chasing after her past with little consideration of Yaz and punishing others in her mom's stead. The resolution of these traumas then boil down to a single moment or contemplation of accepting what happened to them, accepting that it was wrong of the villains to do, accepting the what if scenarios are over and their anxiety is about the past, not the present, and accepting that they have to be stronger than what happened to them. They have to accept the risks of their lifestyle over and over again, knowing now what the fallout could be from it almost every moment of Book 4 in Flux. They are battling mental health when Korra literally bends the remnants of her trauma out of her, and when 13 throws her chance at past memories away in favor of who she is now. And they continue that mental battle when facing their traumatizers Zaheer and Tecteun, and then they even battle that fear of their trauma occurring to Asami or Yaz in favor of the possibility of love instead. This theme of battling mental health, of them at their worst, is what allows them to be at their best when comforting the possible trauma of Kuvira in the finale, or Yaz in 13's finale episode. The theme comes full circle and fuels both Korra and 13's character arcs. Speaking of, it's time to get into character types and their growth in both shows. We already established our main protagonists are stubbornly independent female characters of Korra and 13, and they are also dynamic characters due to how their mental health arc helps them grow. But they wouldn't have that arc if not for their emotional support provided by Nog and the TARDIS, as well as mainly their friends. But, Nog and the TARDIS also helped. Both Team Avatar and the fam have a comedic relief character in Bolin and Milo and Graham and Dan. A reactionary Benusho character in Ryan and Mako that aren't quite stock or foil characters despite how they disagree with or challenge our main character. And we also have fairly static characters in Asami and Yaz that serve as confident and love interest for our main characters. Wow, that is a mouthful, and I haven't even gotten to analyze where the villain or mentor characters lie in this mess. All right, let's get into it. For the comic relief characters, they do have an arc despite seeming static. In the case of Graham, he chooses to begin his story with 13 to avoid his grief, until he confronts it and then becomes more embracing of her chaotic life and thus values the life he has to get back to. Similarly, Dan ends up in the same place as Graham and needing to go back to his life and his adventures with 13, inspiring him to do so. But Dan starts in a place of denial about his house and job and die, usually traveling with 13 to continue avoiding life. Both characters use their adventures with 13 to gain a footing in what their worth is and what they value. They share their insights about that by dropping wisdom on 13, but they ultimately want to use what they've learned and continue making jokes with the ones they love at home. Now, in the case of Bolin as a comedic character, he seems to be an audience surrogate at time with his fanboying, but he does grow due to the women he dates, failing to mellow them and instead finding his worth in lava bending, only to have this small redemption arc in bringing down the very woman who he thought was helping him save lives. Honestly, his arcs are a mess, and I will chalk a lot of it up to that the creators not knowing if they'd still be making new seasons of Legend of Korra, so they were a bit rushed and opted for mini arcs instead. Plus, the representation of women in Bolin's arc compared to Graham and Dan's is not good. That's a lot of abuse for a so-called joke. As for Milo as a comedic character, I think his only arc is growing up, but I can't tell if he truly does that. So let's just call him a comedic stock or a static character instead. Find me in the comments if you disagree. I'm kidding. Well, I do mean it, but like, I'm nice. We're all nice. So just nerd out if you want to. I really don't know how to categorize Milo. I swear to God, this child. Um, Next we have two characters that are hard to pin down: Mako and Ryan. both of whom are static characters throughout, with Ryan struggling with grief, dyspraxia, and the future of humanity, and Mako struggle with romance, his future, and his past of homelessness. These characters really only share their vulnerability with family, Ryan with Graham, and Mako with Bolin, despite giving empathy and yet challenging their friends with their sense of morality. The reason why I hesitate to call either character a foil character is because they really aren't opposites of our main character of 13 and Korra. Mako definitely does more to challenge Korra's thinking, and this actually has consequences, whereas Ryan has moments where he shows the opposite of 13's morality, but the way they are both written doesn't seem like they're intentionally comparing the two characters, and are rather cannon fodder to prove the main character is nearly always right, not them and their points that they're making. Hence, I struggle to identify these two core characters definitively as stock or tertiary or confidant or foil or love interest in Mako's case, which I thought was odd since both shows have them until I realized these characters change to fill the gaps of the story and round out the four-person team fam dynamic. They adapt as characters. Clever, clever.
And a person in her own goddamn right.
The last character type is not where I'll be talking about fandom outcry over Thasmin and Korrasami, but just their character type and personality and family for comparison. From their introduction, Asami and Yaz are well defined as talented, ambitious, and impatient women in their field, growing from confidant to love interest with the main characters of Korra and 13. No, I will not talk about the love triangle parallelogram thing happening in Legend of Korra or shipping rumors of Yaz and Ryan, because even though bisexual representation is important, these messy storylines and rumors are not what these characters are all about. Because even though their function in the story changes, Asami and Yaz themselves do not truly grow as characters, but rather increase their own personality traits to create tension with the main characters, making them a round character until practically their last season. What that all boils down to is Asami is the same character from books 1 to 3, but in book 4, after the time skip, Asami's inherent character traits of curiosity and kindness increase and spur her into visiting her father in prison, which in turn creates tension and misunderstanding with Korra, which then serves to resolve the major plot problem of Kuvira's invasion in the finale with the help of Asami's father. You see, increasing personality traits lead to tension with the main character and plot resolution by the end. As for Yaz, she again is the same character in her first 2 seasons, but after Revolution of the Daleks, Yaz's emotional intelligence, self-worth, and doctor-like tendencies are turned way the fuck up, which enables Yaz to question 13's state of mind, decisions, and feelings throughout, which holds a mirror up to 13 and reveals the inner turmoil 13 faces until she deals with the Fob Watch and Yaz in the finale of Flux. However, unlike Asami, Yaz's journey doesn't end there, for as these character traits increase in strength, they allowed her to face coming out, asking out the Doctor, and ultimately save the Doctor's life in the next trio of specials. I don't think they were able to do this sort of story with Asami due to lack of time and general censorship, but in the continuation of comics called Turf Wars, more of these topics Yaz faced are also addressed by Asami. Even if these shows sometimes forget very big character traits like Yaz's police abilities and Asami's inventor capabilities, when the writers do pay attention to these traits and ramp them up, it is always a signal to the viewer that these confidants not only listen to our main characters, but also question and help the main characters grow to resolve conflict. And after this happened, it seems like the show finally embraces the change of Yaz and Asami to become love interests, as this tension can lay the groundwork of trust and communication for that future relationship with the main characters. But when these characters fall in love is entirely subjective, so I'm not going to subject you to an analysis built on such shaky ground. Which is also another interesting connection between Legend of Korra and Doctor Who, and that they have somewhat shaky representation of queer women in a almost but no, it actually is romantic relationship. Yet fans latched on and made these small implications into important and groundbreaking representation in both fandoms. Another tangent because I don't know where else to put this, but Asami and Yaz have a loving family that they dearly value, and which shapes how they value Team Avatar and the fam. Maybe this dynamic is what allows them to become quick confidants and eventual love interests for our main characters, or maybe 13 and Korra learn through their arc to depend on others besides Nog and the TARDIS for emotional support. E.g., Yaz and Asami. Alright, now that we're on a roll, let's analyze the similarities between Legend of Korra villains and Doctor Who villains. But rather than go into the socioeconomic political commentary surrounding Korra's villains, as well as how cops are positively portrayed in both shows with having a side character on the police force, despite not touching on the corruptness of the 1920s police Korra is based on, as well as the racial and gender issues Yaz must face, as well as what the hell pushes Mako and Yaz to join the police force in the first place, and how Legend of Korra villains may symbolize anarchism, Marxism, fascism, or about how Doctor Who's possible symbolism of the black man as capitalism, the dregs as climate change, or the gods of mental illness. I want to take a more personal approach to the main antagonists by analyzing what they represent to the main characters, rather than to us viewers, because we know, and how these villains serve the main character's growth. Keep in mind what I said earlier about 13 and Korra's mental health arcs, because these villains mark the milestones of that journey by basically creating that significant trauma, which forces our main characters to isolate themselves have an identity crisis, and find a place of acceptance. Also, I'm not really going to touch on the villains of Series 11 and Series 12 of Doctor Who, mainly because Series 11 doesn't have a main one unless you include Tim Shaw, and Series 12 was technically the Master and Ashad, but I want to focus on them as a pair in Power of the Doctor, which is very weird distinction to make, I know, but it matters to me, and I promise I will explain eventually. But for now, let's focus on Korra's main antagonists per book and the myriad of antagonists 13 faces in the Flux. The first similarity I want to focus on is between Amon and the Weeping Angels. To Korra, Amon is someone that can take away her bending, her strength, her identity in one fell swoop. To 13, Weeping Angels have historically been creatures capable of separating him from the lifeline the TARDIS offers, taking away his life of traveling with Amy and Rory, and now representing taking away the memories of a life serving under division. These are terrifying fucking villains that prey off of Korra and the Doctor's reliance on their main strengths and are rightfully portrayed as the very serious threats they pose. And when that threat is made real, with Amon taking away Korra's ability to bend, and the twist of the Weeping Angels using 13's humanity against her to make her into an immovable statue like them, it is a defining moment for these characters and the show itself. Because what Amon and the Weeping Angels are doing is removing the autonomy of the main female characters. For Korra, this will be the cornerstone that all the rest of her PTSD is built upon. For 13, this is just another trigger,
as I like to call it, Tuesday,
of people like the Master Tecteun and Division stealing her autonomy, her memories, and just her ability to be herself. The next similarity I'll make is between Unalaq and the Ravagers Swarm and Azure. Both posture themselves as alternate equals to the Avatar and to the Doctor. For Unalaq, he originally represents a spiritual mentor for Korra, until all hell breaks loose with the Spirit Portal, the Water Sybil Tribe War, and the betrayal of Korra's father. We are actively building trust issues that Korra will take out on Team Avatar. Yay. In comparison, Storm and Azure simply represent another thing in the Doctor's division days that she no longer knows, but which threaten the functionality of time itself. These villains are very different, I'll admit, but their presence enforce the universal idea of balance within the Doctor Who and Legend of Korra universe, with Unalaq serving as a dark avatar and the Ravagers serving as a destructive force to balance out the presence of the timeless child. Do these villains attack the core or create a foil of what these main characters are supposed to be? Yes, absolutely. Does the show get into and analyze what that means for our characters and their identities as a whole? No, they do not. Because remember, back in reality, the creators are on a serious time crunch, and cancellation of these shows is a major possibility right now. Therefore, I'll leave this comparison at that. But one comparison I cannot leave alone is that of Zaheer and Tecteun. Zaheer wants a world free of the Avatar and the possible tyranny her existence poses, whereas Tecteun wants a universe free of the 13th Doctor spewing hope and morality. Both villains see our main characters as a threat to their ideal world. Both villains go to extremes to exterminate this threat. Zaheer imprisons Korra, poisons her, and fights her. Tecteun fights and imprisons 13. And side note, because I don't know where else to mention this, but fans have pointed out that 13 is chained up and choked a lot more often than her male predecessors and has some BDSM shit sprinkled throughout her run on the show. So unpack that as either being part of a progressive era or as negatively impacting feminism, because I don't want to get into this particular essay, but we have noticed, Chibnall. I got my eyes on you, mister. um, anyways, Zaheer and Tecteun are the what-if scenarios that haunt our main characters. Moreover, what Zaheer does to Korra becomes an embodiment of her trauma, trapping her spiritual self in a moment of terror that terrifies Korra to this day, as well as literally carrying that trauma around with her in the shape of Zaheer's poison that lingers in her body still. While Tecteun is not an embodiment of 13's trauma like Zaheer is, every trauma 13 has had can be directly linked to Tecteun. Her memory loss of serving division, having lost Carbonus as a companion, having been Tecteun's adopted and experimented on timeless child, and the chaos of the flux of planet time and the destruction of Gallifrey being pinned upon her by the villains themselves. So, like Korra, 13 now has to face her traumas by facing her villain, and how Tecteun and Zaheer represent the what if of who these characters were, are, and will be. Korra is only able to travel the spirit world after facing Zaheer, and 13 is only able to be vulnerable and herself after discarding the fob watch Tecteun guarded. Again, these villains are watermarks, showing how far 13 and Korra have grown. Lastly, the grand finale villains of Kuvira and the Master, in particular the Master scene in Power of the Doctor. I told you I'd circle back, I'm not a liar. Here, after Korra and 13 have faced their trauma, regained their sense of self, and grown capable of loving, these villains pull the rug out from under them, with Kuvira stepping in, serving as a stand-in avatar by rebuilding the Earth Nation to bring balance to the world, And with the Master becoming a surrogate doctor by literally regenerating into her body and kidnapping Yaz as a companion, these villains are taking what our main characters have fought so hard for. They are stealing the identity of the Avatar and the Doctor. They are kidnapping the main character's friends to keep them hostage, and they are tarnishing the name of all the good these characters have ever done together. The Master mocks 13 by creating his own fam of Daleks and Cyber Masters, mocks her by stealing her wardrobe to sully the name of all past Doctors, and 13 has once again lost the autonomy to fight in her own mind and body. While Kuvira doesn't toy with Korra like this, by fighting Kuvira, Korra shows her identity growth by challenging Kuvira to one-on-one to reduce bloodshed, only to lose, but eventually wins against Kuvira, only to empathize with her and see that this world may still need an avatar. But, more importantly, Korra learns who she is beyond the responsibility of the Avatar and finally learns what she wants. By growing through this arc and finding balance within herself, Korra is finally able to love Asami and go on a vacation with her. And by having Yaz and 13's hologram work to stop the Master from destroying the Earth, 13 learns her power and identity lies in those around her, which is why it's called the power of the Doctor, because it's the power of her friends. Yeah. And rather than fight to remain who she is now, as so many doctors before her have done, 13 is able to embrace change, regenerate, and let her companions go embrace their own lives. While she and Yaz don't get happily ever after like Korrasami, at least they get ice cream. No, I'm just kidding. Because what does all this add up to? What is the meaning behind all these traumas and breakthroughs and growth our villains make 13 Korra go through? I see it as a moment where it all comes together during that time sitting on the TARDIS, where 13 and Yaz refuse to say goodbye, because they recognize how special it was to be themselves and travel with each other. And that is something that Korra and Asami will realize in their spiritual travels as well. And it's because of their arc that they're able to realize such a beautiful universal truth like that.
Let's see, shall we?
Finally, let's talk about the reason we're all here. We're fans. And we have opinions. Many of which cross over nicely between Legend of Korra and the first female Doctor in Doctor Who. Some of these criticisms we have are genuine. Some were made before the facts of the matter came out. Some were made out of nostalgia for previous eras. And some were simply made by outraged nerds who aren't even fans. I'm not really gonna go looking for this criticism because if you've been in this fandom as long as I have, you've read them all, and god damn it, you really don't want to read anymore. So, I won't be pulling directly from sources that I have been, which honestly might make the criticism to be able to stand on their own legs and in a better light than they deserve, because I want to understand, compare, and respect everyone's been here, and in this tiny space I've carved out of YouTube. And that goes for the comments below too, by the way. Just be kind. The biggest criticism I've heard of is the main protagonist of 13 and Korra being unlikable or inconsistent. Liking something is subjective, but for Korra at least, it was the fact that she was so different from her predecessor Aang that ticked off a lot of viewers. She seemed to be the opposite of him in almost every single way, and that was an intentional choice by the writers in order to surprise the audience, age the show up, and differentiate this new show from Avatar: The Last Airbender. In particular, fans tend to take issue with how arrogant Korra was in her avatar identity, since she knew who she was from a young age. How she was a teenager that was a lot more stubborn and often chose violence to resolve issues, and how she also seemed to be a lot less spiritual and a lot more romantic than Aang. However, this is just Korra's starting point, from which she grows into a better and more compassionate avatar. In fact, just by looking at how Aang struggled on earthbending and how Korra struggled on airbending, the writers allude to where their growth was heading and what qualities they had that the other lacked to become better and balanced avatars. For Aang, he had a problem with standing his ground. He was unable to face the problem head on and always tried non-violent and non-confrontational workarounds, which ultimately culminated in his grief about running away from his responsibilities, his people, and then his beliefs when fighting Ozai. Whereas Korra had the opposite problem. She was too confrontational and had to have things her way, which caused strife with Mako, stilted her spiritual growth as an airbender, and made her lack the nuance or empathy to understand the villains and their civilian supports. These traits made her frustrating at times, and also spoke to how audiences hold women responsible for outbursts different to men. But, without these traits, she couldn't have grown into herself and into the avatar she wanted to be, similar to the nostalgia we all have over Aang learning to confront his traumas to unlock the avatar state and defeat Ozai on his own terms. I also mentioned briefly there the critique of Korra and 13 being consistent, but I feel like that critique is more pointed at 13 given how Korra's traits were solid enough to make fans dislike her. To which I say, eh. There are definitely moments where 13's morality shift in a way previous doctors were steadfast in. Like how 12 criticized corporations and oxygen and 13 didn't even try to in AAA. Or how sometimes she condones violence when 10 would never use a gun. But this is then expanded on and disproven upon by the Time Lord Victorious methods in the Waters of Mars, and also several other episodes. And also just how her goofy tendencies seem to be recycled from the 11th Doctor. Again, boy, have I read too many unsolicited critiques of the 13th Doctor from trolls online. Fuck. I will say, if you only read the scripts for these episodes, the 13th Doctor is usually used for exposition and not characterization. But the focus does change during the following seasons since the plot revolves around the reveal of her being the Timeless Child. But also, Jodie Whittaker's portrayal of the Doctor never wanes in her awe and wonder of the universe. So there is a point to be made about why society is holding the 13th Doctor more accountable for inconsistencies and copycat behaviors than her male predecessors, but there are legs to stand on in this criticism regardless, which is why any debate with the 13th Doctor is hard to navigate, because we have to understand if these critiques are made with good intent and analyze our own inconsistencies and biases when making these critiques. Speaking of, the 13th Doctor wasn't the only one with character inconsistencies. Sensor companions were also going through a lot, and whose issues were often streamlined by the plot. For instance, it is commonly forgotten that Yaz has police skills and mental health issues after being bullied, or that Ryan's dyspraxia makes certain sci-fi tastes impossible, or that Graham is constantly battling his cancer anxiety as well as grief about Grace. It is common to drop character subplots, but not inherent character traits. In fact, Legend of Korra also deals with disability, particularly in people losing and regaining the ability to bend, as well as just not having it in the first place and what that means for society. And for Korra in particular, she becomes unable to walk or care for herself for years after fighting Zaheer. Both shows only do one episode deep dives into these characters' issues, but again, the inconsistencies had to be stated. Another critique that Legend of Korra and the 13th Doctor's era has is about how their plotline seems sloppy. This does have real merit, since Legend of Korra never knew if it was getting a new season to wrap up other plot threads, and at times had to rush production due to scheduling. As for Doctor Who, there were rumors of the BBC becoming bored of it and not getting enough viewership. But then the pandemic happened, and Doctor Who was officially cancelled until Chris Chibnall threw Flux together. And when you look at the facts of the matter, this era of Doctor Who was following the trend of getting less episodes than its previous eras. And then everything changed when Chibnall restructured the plots of Series 11 to be self-contained episodes, then went back to normal with an overarching mystery in Series 12, then went haywire in making Flux a 6-part story on its own. Reality really influenced these creators because sometimes Legend of Korra had to rush its pacing in order to resolve its main conflict, or create filler and subplots to make up for time. And Chibnall's approach to Doctor Who left viewers either wanting less of hitting the nail on its head regarding social issues, or needing more in order to make sense of the confusion of the Timeless Child and Flux. Again, if I were to be wholly cynical, these critiques may not be coming from fans, but rather haters pushing that the plots were sloppy due to having to subtly fit in feminism, diversity, queer storylines, and make episodes around political issues, which really isn't the case. I'm sorry, just stop trying to hide your bigotry behind logic. I know where this is going. Because these shows are financial enterprises at the end of the day, which push the shows to rush certain elements so it can be broadcast and make money for the next season, not to mention the airing troubles Korra had when sometimes only airing online on different days, and the airing troubles of having gap years for Doctor Who. I will say, if you want to see which of these critiques hold water and how they can be fixed, there is a beautiful and just phenomenal retelling of Legend of Korra by Hello Future Me that takes these plot tweaks into account and makes clever workarounds to tell a more conclusive and moving story that honestly made me cry. As for Doctor Who, there's definitely merits in the writers mishandling things, especially given that the Series 11 finale was a rough draft due to Chibnall overworking to fix other writers' episodes, as well as the child presentation and exploration, and not concluding Flux in its entirety. But maybe I'm just too forgiving of this, given the grueling grind it took to make these shows a reality and being unable to reshoot, reanimate, or rewrite with such unforgiving deadlines. Like, seriously, if you look at the block scheduling for Flux being made, they had literally no time to reshoot or rewrite things and had to keep things in, and it's just chaos. It's just chaos. But I have to believe they did their best, and I do. They did the best of what they were given. There is one particular plotline I will dive into, given how important the comparison is, and that is the evolution, handling, and reaction to Korrasami and Thasmin. Korrasami is the ship name of our main character Korra and side character Sami, which I remember rumblings by shippers about in, I think, book 2 or book 3, only for the writers to fully embrace it as much as they could on Nickelodeon in book 4. Similarly, Thasmin is a ship name for the 13th Doctor and her companion Yasmin Khan, which began gaslighting fans of Yaz's mom asking if they were dating in Arrakis in the UK, only for the writers to build upon it, the costume makers hint at it with Yaz's costumes, and to finally make canon in the trio specials after Flux. Again, I will outsource to another creator about this, for Council Geeks has a great overview about how Thasmin came to be and just how much it was brought about due to fans. and actors and writers. It's really weird. It's a very Schrodinger's cat situation. But yeah, the most common criticism about Thasmin and Korrasami is just how much of it was subtext when the relationship really began, and the handling of the relationship. For it was a tweet that canonized Korrasami. Back in my day, we called them tweets, and I will not refer to it as anything else. And this happened after its finale of Korrasami heading off into the spirit world, holding hands, saying they were about to kiss, and later on talking about how much of their relationship was censored given the young age of the audience. Which, ew, don't blame the children, especially when Korra and Asami's relationship was the most stable one-on show, given the awful love parallelogram of Team Avatar in Book 1, and the straight-up abusive ones that Bolin gets into. But with the knowledge that Korra and Asami's relationship was a queer one, that was actually what got me back into the show in middle school, because I'm queer. One can definitely read how they complimented and cared for each other in Book 4 as properly queer. Also, I'm using queer here to describe both Korrasami and Thasmin, because Korra and Asami are definitely not lesbian and are left to be assumed as bisexual or pansexual characters, and it's never confirmed what Yaz identifies her sexuality as, and if the Doctor properly identifies as a woman not non-binary, because that is another issue with both portrayals in that it is undefined and fluid. But, on the other hand, that makes the representation more universal for trans folks and for those whose sexualities are hard to define or are fluid in real life. Because again, the subtext only becomes text at the very end, which gets very well-deserved criticism that the subtext wasn't actually there, and that these relationships were rushed into fruition. Even when these characters show physical affection towards each other in the form of a hug, which solidified the subtext, it was only during the final season of Legend of Korra and 13's era on Doctor Who. I would like to mention how Yaz then comes out to herself in the following episode, and 13 is confronted about her feelings for Yaz thanks to Dan. What a lad. Which one can view as erasing or solidifying the subtext, but nonetheless is a positive coming out. Then the next episode is all about 13 coming to terms for her feelings and actually talking about them with Yaz, which is a really big character moment for 13, who typically, to her detriment, keeps things to herself and pushes others away. But she has since grown due to Yaz and her trauma healing, only to cut off any chance of relationship with Yaz because she doesn't want to hurt or be hurt given her time is coming to an end soon. This pissed off a lot of shippers, making them feel especially cheated since the representation of Thasmin ensured that the Doctor still likes women despite changing gender. But mainly because 13 and Yaz never kissed to become canon. Though kissing in Doctor Who is rarely for canonization reasons, if we're being honest. This is another criticism it shares with Legend of Korra, but again, Legend of Korra had to deal with censorship, whereas Chibnall just wanted their love to be unrequited since it would make Power of the Doctor hurt that much more. Which it did, because you could see how much Yaz loved the Doctor and how that motivated her to get her Doctor back, only to say goodbye to her. Thasmin doesn't really get a happy ending, which is in keeping with Doctor Who tradition. But at least this time, Yaz has a support group, and the Doctor can proudly go into regeneration having grown and enjoyed her time being the 13th Doctor. Whereas with Korra and Asami, it's assumed they have a happy ending, which shows how much Korra has grown and shows its young audiences that a happy ending is possible for queer people. And then you can go on to read their comics or wait for the new Avatar story to be made to truly canonize their love they had for each other. But altogether, even if Thasmin and Korrasami were lackluster in their representation, they spoke something very real in fans, and that is why fans fought so hard for them and still talk about them to this day. I think that's a happy note to end this essay on, even if there's so many other criticisms and comparisons to touch on. For instance, the use of police in Korra and with Yaz, the use of emotional support via Naga and the TARDIS, disability representation, the use and undoing of the genocide of air nomads or Time Lords, how both shows highlight found families, how Korra's Americanization and Doctor Who's modern day companions exhausted fans, and just much more I couldn't think of off the top of my head. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry to touch on more of these comparisons. I just ran out of time, and I'm trying to get out this video while Doctor Who and Avatar are still in the news cycle. Which, surprisingly, they still are. Way to go, us. But I fucking started this essay in April 23, and oh, what a different time that was for me. Didn't know I'd go on my own little trauma arc like Korra 13. But here we are. With me rambling off script again, because I never know how to end these videos. Anyways, if you've listened this far, I am so grateful, and would love to hear about any comparisons or what have you in the comments below. I am really proud of this video. I put so much extra work into it, and that's why, just this once, I would very much appreciate you sharing this with other wonderful nerds like yourself. I'm sorry. I'm just really not good at asking for things, but I'm trying to get better at that. And for anyone else on their own mental health journey like Korra 13, I'm sorry about the troubles facing you now. But I believe in you and your ability to just be brilliant. Yeah. Thanks again. I really need to go now, otherwise I'll start quoting too much off the cuff, and that can get cringe. Yeah. So, thanks for listening. Bye. And Chibnall's approach to Doctor Who left viewers either wanting less of hitting the nail on its head regarding social issues or needing more in order to make sense of the— oh my god, Catherine. Hi. You gonna close the door? Hi. Oh, I'm gonna sneeze. Damn it. I love you. Could you close the door on your way out? You're not going out? You're gonna rest in the sunshine? Oh, bitch. Hold on. Damn it. We're still recording like fools. Okay. And Chibnall's approach to Doctor Who left viewers either wanting less of the hitting the nail on its head regarding social issues or needing more in order to make sense of the